Well, welcome everyone who is just signing on. We're going to give it a minute or two to let people join. And Joe, for your benefit, while folks are signing in here, we are going to have members of the team, a number of our customers, some friends of yours. And as I was mentioning, when you shared the event, it definitely caught some steam on LinkedIn and generated a number of registrations. We will also be recording this, so for those of you who are joining at a later date, welcome. Great to have you here. Our format is going to be about 20-30 minutes of discussion with Joe. We're going to learn about his kind of professional journey, influences, any turning points, highlights, kind of walk through a conversation there. And then we're going to open it up to questions and answers. So you'll be able to raise your hand and ask questions, chat them in. And we'll pick Joe's brain. With that, I think it's about 1 minute after 2. We can get things started. Coop will continue admitting folks. I was just telling Joe that I believe it was a mutual connection on LinkedIn and the magic of today's social networks that actually connected us. I saw one of Joe's posts picking up some steam, and it caught my attention. I checked out Joe's profile, and Joe, your experience and a lot of the things that you bring to the table from an expertise standpoint are incredibly relevant to our work and to our clients. And so I couldn't resist reaching out, inviting you to come in for an interview. We find that while some companies have a very established and strong go-to-market strategy, many do not, and there's often a gap in that. So I thought it'd be great just to bring you in, introduce you, have a conversation, and get you in front of our community. For background, Joe is a award-winning B2B marketer, chief marketing officer. He has been with companies like Novell, Captaris, Interactive Intelligence, Motivosity, if I'm saying that one correctly. And Joe is now a consultant and advisor on go-to-market strategies. You've also been to 26 countries, which is very interesting and something I would love to hear about, whether it's now or at another time. But Joe, welcome. Great to have you. And if you wouldn't mind, just tell us a little bit more about you and kind of what you're up to today.
Thanks, Patrick. And thanks for having me. I don't know, you kind of stole it all. I don't know if there's anything else. So I've been a CMO for over 20 years, and just last September, I kind of stepped away from the daily operator role and took on a role of advising companies on go-to-market strategy. And that has been, that's been pretty fascinating, mainly around the diversity of the business. So my entire career has been in technology, but I did some advisory work on go-to-market for an online bank, for a marketing agency, as well as for a number of SaaS companies. So a lot of diverse stuff, and excited to be here today. So thanks.
Can you tell me, and with however much relevancy you would like to use, what got you started in business? What was like your first job, and also specifically in marketing? I know a lot of people see marketing from the outside and see the creative side and want to be in it, but it's not something you can oftentimes just make a leap from college into a marketing role. You often have to establish yourself or get there somehow. But can you talk about your beginnings and how you got into marketing and kind of even why you stayed and why you continue to work in the field?
Yeah, I look at it and I wonder why everybody doesn't want to be a marketer. If you think of all the facets of business, it is the most fun, it's the most exciting, it's super impactful on the business. So that's really the reason to stay. I came up through product marketing, which is a little bit more rare for CMOs to come up through the product side. But I think it's a great way to do it, because if you could have, a deep understanding of the product and how to explain the product and the values and benefits around that product to a prospect, I think you're just a much better marketer. So I started my career, it's all been in tech, but primarily on the services side, on the client success side. And then I was working for Novell, and there's a lot of, call it luck, involved in any career movement. The CEO of Novell and the CEO of AT&T got together and said, we should do something together. And so Ray Norder was the CEO of Novell, and he came back and said, hey, we're going to do something together with AT&T. I don't know what it is. Go figure it out. And he gave me like a developer, a development manager and a developer. And we got our heads together with the AT&T folks and came up with something around blending computing networking with telephony, with the telecom side. And that's how I got started in marketing. And it's just, I think it's such a fun profession.
It is. I also think that there's the marketing that people see on the surface, which is, I think, the fun, creative messaging, branding, a lot of the things that we see and observe. But then there's the stuff that is kind of the unsexy marketing, the guts of, and this is where we get into go-to-market strategy of who is your customer, why, how are you going to reach them, what those channels are, and then of course it gets down into that. Can you talk about? Maybe that part of marketing, because I am going to ask some go-to-market type questions. I'm curious to pick your brain on, but who owns that? I know that and I guess one of my questions is, what is the job of a CMO? What's kind of the number one job? But who owns that strategy in an organization? Who determines the direction of the marketing strategy? And can you also, and I don't mean to stick three questions in one, but what are those foundational pieces that need to be in place before you can get to the fun stuff?
Yeah, I think who owns it, starting there, I think a lot of it is dependent on who you're working for. I spent 10 years at Interactive Intelligence, and the product was absolutely driven by the CEO, but he was very hands-off when it came to marketing and would kind of let us do our thing. And I can remember sitting down with him and saying, Don, we want to spend a lot of money. Here's what we're trying to do. What do you think? And he would look at me and go, this is a marketing decision. You're the marketing guy, decide. And I think that's a little bit rare. There's a lot more control freaks than there are Don Browns in the world who are willing to trust their people to do the job. But I think that's an important factor. So I think, as a marketing executive or a CMO, I think you continue to push the boundaries of that. You try and influence and own as much of that puzzle and those pieces as you can, until some CEO says, hey, that's not you, that's somebody else, get out of the way. But I think otherwise, it's an opportunity to influence the business for success. For me, probably the biggest challenge has been the analytic part of marketing. You talk about the non-sexy stuff. I mean, there is a lot of just number crunching and looking at conversion rates and performance and those kinds of things. And for me, I just relied on other people to do that. I hired people that were really good at it, and I recognized that I wasn't. And I looked to them to be able to provide that kind of guidance. And, it all came together.
When you look at, and I know it's actually maybe hard to say this because every business is unique in its own way. Some businesses are born with, and we mentioned Cotopaxi. I mean, that business is born with a brand in mind and building a brand from day one, and which is the credit to a founder who knows what they're doing. I think most people kind of become their brand and then try to fix it later. But and using brand as one example, but when you look at a company, particularly when you're working on and you're trying to get the direction right, where do you start? Where do you look first to determine the marketing needs or kind of the pieces of the puzzle? Where do you look first? What do you look for to kind of help elevate or grow a successful marketing program?
Um, one of the biggest ones for me has been to try and look at how your message can be differentiated. I, I think that the biggest plague that marketers have right now is all their stuff looks the same. You have, uh, you take a number of companies and you just look at it and it just all sounds the same. So a big part of what we've tried to do in the companies that I've been a part of is to say, how do we stand out from the crowd? How do we look differently? And go back to the interactive intelligence example. We competed with Avaya and Cisco were our two biggest competitors. Avaya sponsored the Olympics. I mean, we were a little $50 million company at the time. So we're going up against these huge giants. And so there's no way we could outspend them. I mean, they were just, their messages were everywhere. So our messages had to just be different. And so we did some really cool creative campaigns that stood out, that got us attention. We worked really hard with analysts and consultants to get them to buy into our story. And then there's a lot of blocking and tackling too, right? Are you knocking on the right doors? Is your message crisp and clear? Do people understand it? Are you talking about benefits to them versus a bunch of feature dump of what your product is? So I think all of those things come into play, but that differentiation piece is really, really critical.
I agree with you, and I love that you pointed up that point to the benefits. It's so easy for people. I see this with our clients, and their messaging often is they're so proud of their services and their products that it's about that's what they see, right? And that's not what the customer cares about. The customer cares about the outcome and the value, and that's often how you get their attention before they can learn about the next piece, which brings me to my next question around the relationship between sales and marketing. I don't know if I've seen it completely firsthand, but I feel like there's some tension sometimes between those two organizations or two divisions. So what do you think the relationship should be between sales and marketing, and how do those two teams work together?
Yeah, I've had real small amounts of friction during my career with my sales counterparts. And I consider myself fortunate for that, because you do hear some horror stories around that. I think that an important thing is, are you measured on the same things? If the marketing team feels that, well, my job is to generate leads, and then good luck to you, all of a sudden you're heading for a train wreck. But I was always, I think just about always, compensated the same way my SVP of sales was compensated. So we still looked at it as, at the end of the day, there was revenue that needed to be brought in. I had a job that I needed to do. They had a job that they needed to do. I spent a ton of time with them and was, if we had disagreements, there was trust that had been built. There was a relationship, and we worked on those things together. If I were running the company, if I were the CEO and I saw conflict between the head of sales and the head of marketing, I'd either have them figure out how to stop that, or I'd replace one of them or both of them. It's just not going to work otherwise.
Yeah. And, I think some of that is tech is leading the pack in terms of a good example. Like, I feel like in tech, sales and marketing do do work a little bit closer than maybe some legacy industries where, you know, marketing was always ivory tower and then the salespeople were somewhere else, you know, and they weren't communicating. But I do think tech does a good job of those two working together. I'm seeing some questions coming in, so guys, if you have them, keep chatting them. I want to ask Joe maybe just a couple other questions around, you know, I think, and I can see this in my own career, that there have been pieces of both good advice and bad advice that have steered my direction. Was there ever a time or a piece of advice that either resonated with you and definitely showed you the path, or bad advice that also did the same? Can you share anything like that comes to mind?
Yeah, the bad one jumps out right away for me. Um, the piece of advice was all around building something from scratch, the thrill of a startup. And I got enamored with it. And I was like, yeah, this sounds really, really good. And I think it's really, really good for some people. It wasn't really, really good for me. I did much better when I had dollars and resources that I could rely on. So it's not, that's not a blanket statement against uh, working for a startup, but for me, it just wasn't what I had hoped that it was. So that was on the bad side. The good side, when I decided that I was going to start doing marketing advisory services, I went to a guy that I've known for a long time that mentored me, and I said, you know, help me think through it. Am I thinking through this the right way? And one piece of advice that he gave me is he said, Joe, only work with people that you like. And you know, I've tried to keep that in mind. And if all of a sudden I'm looking at you know, a good opportunity, but I'm surrounded by people that I go, these just aren't really the people that I want to spend all my time with, then I'm trying to be disciplined enough to walk away from that. And you can't always do that earlier in your career. It's a lot harder to do because, you know, you got rent to pay and you know, you're trying to build a resume. But overall, I think it's solid advice.
Yeah, I mean, you have to have real relationships with the people that you work with, and they, you know, you have to be able to trust them, and often that level of trust, you know, comes by being able to work and like and communicate and build it. So, and those things do rear their head later at later dates. You know, if you feel a flag on a relationship early on, it's usually, I've found that you know, your gut is usually right.
Usually,
Um, yeah. Do you have a coach for yourself? Do you rely on coaches, mentors? Do you have any kind of advisory network that you go to?
I do. So I have, and I've really started to dig into this whole process of mentoring because I think it is so valuable, both as the recipient and as the mentor. And so, yeah, I have a list of people that, you know, if I'm faced with a decision that I'm kind of scratching my head on, I'll call them up and go through the questions with them. And you know, I think in every case, they've either been down the road that I'm going down, they're just farther down that road than I am, or they're they're in a completely different industry, which is also pretty helpful to just say, you know, how do you guys think of it over there? You know, you're in a B2C space and I'm in a B2B space. How would you approach this? So it's been really helpful. But I think there's a lot of value for everyone to be a mentor. And I think sometimes people think, well, I'll be a mentor when I'm, you know, 50 years old, but how do I be a mentor early on? If it's your second job, you can mentor the person who it's your first job. If it's your first job out of college, go mentor the person who hasn't graduated from college yet. So I think everybody can do it. And I think it's just really rewarding to do that.
Yeah, yeah. I saw this Tim Ferriss quote one time. He's like, if you want someone to be your mentor, you don't ask them. I think you sometimes just have to ask them for the help, and that, and then they become your mentor by virtue of helping.
Oh, the asking someone to be your mentor is the weirdest thing. I think Simon Sinek, I saw an interview with him, and he's like, it's like going up to somebody that you don't know and say, will you be my friend? It's just not how it's done. I mean, it just evolves. You're picking their brain, and the next thing you know, you're just comfortable with them. They're comfortable with you. They'll take your calls. They'll, all of a sudden the relationship's there.
Yeah, no, that's right. On kind of on this track around your own professional stuff, and do you have a way that you stay productive? Any routines, habits that help you either plan your week, start your day, and keep you productive? So what are the things that Joe does to stay on it?
I'm a list guy. I am a heavy list guy on near-term lists. So I will make a list of the things that I'm going to get done today. And if I get tempted to add something to the list that I think, no, that's something that's going to happen next week, I leave it off the list. So I look at it near term. And then the other thing that I really like and try and practice is to reflect on my performance. We had, I don't know if this name rings a bell for you, Noelle Pikus Pace. She was a Olympic skeleton racer. Took the silver medal in 2014. So skeleton, are you familiar with skeleton? So that's the one, they go down the same track as a bobsled, but they're on their stomach head first with their chin an inch off the ice, going down the track at 90 miles an hour. And she talks about this process of planning and acting and reflecting being the thing at the end, because that's how we get better. We go back instead of constantly moving and looking to go to the next thing. We look back and go, well, how'd that go? What did I do well, and should I do more of, and what did I struggle with, and do I need to make adjustments to? So I've tried to do that as well.
Yeah. I think I'm seeing a bunch of chats and questions, so I don't want to hog your time and with all of mine. So Coop, if you want to either call on someone or relay a question for Joe, that would be great.
Yeah, so we have had a few come in here today. So Joe, you've piqued everybody's interest, which is awesome. So the first one is from Daniel Steinberg, and he doesn't have a quiet environment, so I'm going to ask on his behalf. So bear with me for just a moment. All right, Joe, going back to what you mentioned before, the compensation model in your career, the marketing that was also performance or commission based, do you think that might be the key to keeping marketing and the sales relationship aligned, that they both have the same skin in the game?
Yeah, that's where I think the alignment happens. So it's revenue generated, and there may be some components for members of the marketing team that are more specific, relative to attendance goals or lead generation goals or performance of the website conversions, those kinds of things. But overall, if the sales leaders and the marketing leaders look at and are measured by and compensated by the same targets, then they're sitting in that room trying to figure out the exact same thing. And one isn't going, no, my job's done. Good luck with your job. So yeah, I definitely think that is a key part of it.
Perfect. Thank you for answering that. The next person we have up to ask a question is Chelsea Pequin. So Chelsea, unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, hi, Joe. So I was just wondering, with the world really moving over to remote, what are some things either you or you've seen other companies do really well? And then on the flip side, what are some things you've seen that we could probably all learn from?
And Chelsea, this is related to this shift to remote working?
Yes.
Yeah. I think one important thing, and it was important before we all got deployed and dispersed to our home offices. But an important one, and this comes back to leadership, much less around marketing, is how do we help employees feel recognized for the work that they're doing? And I think with a remote workforce, that becomes even more important because those personal relationships are much harder to develop. I feel bad for the people that get hired in the midst of the pandemic and never met their boss in person. So anything that you can do, and there's some great tech tools that allow you to do this, things like Motivosity, that allow you to make sure that employees feel recognized for the work that they do. I think that's certainly one of the most impactful that I've seen. On the negative side, I think, again, coming back to leadership, it's when leaders don't recognize the need for connection that their employees have. And that usually happens when the leader doesn't really have that need. And they're like, hey, it's great, just go do your work. And if you need anything, call me. It doesn't work that way for so many people. They need some interaction. So doing quality one-on-ones and reaching out on a regular basis and doing everything to keep those connections, I think, are really important.
Awesome. And then moving on to our next question. This one's from M. Bailey. So M. Bailey, if you could unmute yourself and ask away.
Joe, it's Marcia Bailey. So, thank you. I was wanting you to highlight maybe your favorite or most memorable marketing or marketing effort, marketing success, and how you got there.
One of the absolute most memorable is a complete rebrand that we did. We had I worked for a company called @Task at the time, and we were trying to sell to enterprises and trying to get them to write, $150,000 checks. And we had this word task in our name, and it didn't convey the right things. So during my interview process to be their new CMO, they said, hey, we're going to change our name. I was like, okay. And then 2 days after I got hired, I was sitting in a board meeting and the board members were saying, okay, so how's that rebrand happening and when's it going to happen? And I just really think we did. I'd give us an A+. I know it's self-serving, but we rebranded the company. We took 4.5 months to do it, which is very, very short. We measured our brand recognition before we rebranded, and then we measured it a year later, and we had achieved the goal of getting back to where we were before we rebranded. And it just allowed us to now market in the way that we wanted to. We took a much bolder position. We started selling to these enterprises, and our solution made sense because of the branding that we had created. And last month, that business sold for $1.6 billion to Adobe. So I think it was all because of the rebrand. Just kidding. But it was a super fun project. I think branding's a lost art in the B2B space. Chief marketing officers should start being named chief lead gen officers, because so much, that's all they're being asked to do. Where's my leads? Give me more leads. How do I get more leads? And so they're losing the art of how to establish a brand. And when you think about it, having that basis, that brand basis underneath, just makes everything else work. It makes the lead gen efforts work if you can establish a brand right out of the gate.
What was the new name?
Workfront.
Oh, got it.
Workfront.
Nice.
And the interesting, one of the best parts about the launch is we kept it a secret. We told our employees, and at that time we probably had 800 employees, so it was kind of hard to keep a secret. But we told them we were going to change the name, and then we told them what the name was ahead of launching it to the market. But the way we launched it to them was, I mean, with huge fanfare. We dropped 2,000 balloons with Workfront on from the ceiling. We were in a big auditorium. We did a big deal. If you kind of liked the name Workfront, you really liked it just because of the event that we produced, which was the goal. One other secret that worked so well with that rebrand is there were 3 of us involved in it. Me as the CMO, the CEO, and my creative director. And too often, everybody wants to say so. You know, we're changing our name, we're rebranding, we're having a new logo. And so all of a sudden you got everybody involved, and it just gets dumbed down to kind of this, okay, I think nobody objected to this one, so this is the one we'll pick. We did it the opposite. There were the 3 of us, and we went bold. We used some imagery and a logo that in the beginning looked like this was nuts, but it worked. And it allowed us to move a lot quicker because we weren't constantly going back to some larger committee. It made a bunch of people mad, but in the end, it worked out great.
Awesome, awesome. Well, Joe, this next question is coming from Megan McNally. So Megan, if you could unmute yourself and ask away.
Absolutely. Hi, Joe.
Hi,
I'd
Megan.
like to circle back to your point with regards to differentiation in messaging. What advice do you have for marketers to get buy-in or alignment from leadership on shifting those messaging strategies?
That's a great one. You know, I think being able to measure things, again, going back to, I don't like that part of marketing, but the value of it is so great. So for example, when we wanted to do all of this stuff and spend all of this money on this rebrand from @Task to Workfront, we said, we're going to go measure our brand recognition before we change the name. And 12 months from now, our goal from this is that we're going to be back at that point again. Those are the things that when you talk about other leadership, CEOs and CFOs, that they can get their arms around, because otherwise they just go, marketing, you guys just spend money and I don't really know what I get from it outside of leads. So especially when you talk about brand, they just go, is this making any kind of a difference? So having some measurements, some things that you say, this is what we're going to accomplish, and then you come back and you report on it, makes a ton of difference. I think the other thing is, you know, experience is inside the business just buys you some trust chips, called them, you know, to where when you do come up with a differentiated message, people will buy in because they go, you know what, he or she kind of steered us in the right direction the last 3 times, so we're gonna trust them. So at Interactive Intelligence, we did a campaign called Stop the Innovation. And everybody was talking about how innovative they were, and we came out with a kind of this counterpoint of innovation is bad. We set up trade show booths. We had picketers that would protest against things that were innovative, and the protesters would protest against Interactive Intelligence, saying that they were the greatest violator of this innovation. Those are the kinds of things that just stand out. They stand out above what everybody else is doing when they're just kind of talking at what turns into almost white noise. I love that question. I don't know if I answered it very well, though.
You did. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So we'll keep rolling into questions. The next one is coming from Kaylin Agate. So Kaylin, if you could unmute yourself and then ask your question.
There, my question is a little self-serving because one of my New Year's resolutions is to read more books. So I'm going to take some from you. If you are a reader and you do enjoy that, are there two books that you can recommend? One that is a little bit more of a cliche that a lot of people know of, but you think it's a tried and true, and one that's a little more unknown that you'd like more people to hear about and read?
Nice. You know, I'm a big Patrick Lencioni fan, and I think he's written 19 books. But The Advantage is one that's great. 5 Dysfunctions of a Team is another one that is great. And the reason I bring those up is if your career is in marketing and you're coming up through the marketing ranks and you've got your eye on wanting to be a CMO at some point in time, I think that it is as much about leadership as it is about marketing skill. So the more you can understand leadership, how leadership works, dynamics of leadership, developing your own leadership skills and traits, I think that's what C-level executives get hired for. You still need to understand how to do digital marketing and how to do events and how to do communications and all those kinds of things. But it really is about leadership and developing some of those skills. And I find it interesting, everybody will focus on whatever their trade is. You know, they're very willing to read books and take classes on finance or sales or whatever their discipline is, but they kind of think that leadership will just happen. And so, you know, you think about all the leadership theories, like critical theory that was developed, and even going back to some of the ancients, Plato and Aristotle, and trying to see how those can influence your leadership skills. I think there's a lot of wisdom in that for somebody who wants to end up in a C-level chair.
Nice.
Awesome. All right. Well, Patrick, do we still have time for maybe one or two more?
If you got them, I got plenty to go as well. And so, yeah.
All right. Joe, are you up for the challenge?
I'm ready.
All right. So this one's coming from James Powell, but he's not able to ask it on his own behalf. So I'll ask for him. Joe, how do you stay on top of trends and maybe what's working in marketing today?
So I read a ton, and I read a lot of blog posts and follow a lot of companies that seem to be doing things well. The other thing that goes for James, I think this goes to the opposite, which is how do you not get sucked into trends that look really cool that aren't? It seems like a lot of marketers, they're just looking for the next shiny thing. So, you know, somebody starts talking about a trend and they jump on it and they pull their team in and that's the next thing we're going to go do. ABM is absolutely one of those. ABM has a role and has a place for some businesses, but I can't count how many companies have jumped on the ABM bandwagon and it hasn't worked. And they go, why hasn't it worked? And you're like, well, for one thing, your price point is too low for an ABM strategy. Number two is, you know, your type of product isn't known. So you need to do a bunch more education to be able to get there. So I think direct answer to James' question is, I think you're just online and reading a lot of this and listening to podcasts and following companies that seem to be doing well and looking at what they do. I also have developed great relationships with CMOs who I think are way better than I am, and I've learned a lot from them and love staying in touch with them getting together and asking them what they're doing.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And a question from me now, because I never really wanted to chase the shiny object or the shooting star. So in saying that, like, what are the top two, like 1 or 2 marketing principles to like always get right foundationally? Like, what are those 1 or 2 things that we should focus on instead of chasing that shiny object?
So go back to one of my earlier answers, which is you have to build a brand. To think that you're just going to do pure lead generation and be successful, I think it's rare. You need to develop a brand. And then I've already mentioned the other principle as well, the differentiation principle. I was at a company and I sat down with the head of sales and he said, have you seen, I won't use the company name, have you seen ABC Corp's material? It was a competitor of ours. And I said, yes. And he said, that's what I want us to look like. And I looked at him and I said, well, we are not going to look like them. And he said, you don't think their stuff's good? I said, I think their stuff's fantastic, but they already got that space. They already look like that. So we're not going to try and look like them. We got to come up with something else that's different, that hopefully is better, but we're not going down the path that somebody else has already gone down.
I'm going to jump in, and if folks, if you have questions, thoughts, things you want to ask Joe, please do. Joe, I would love to understand or ask if there's been, and I don't want to use the word failure, but the blessings in disguise, the things that happened that, weren't the ideal or expected outcome, maybe a role you didn't get early on that ended up sending you off in another direction, or some flop, something. And I mean, I've got dozens of examples. I don't think you need me to point you in a direction, but what have been some of those stepping stones that helped you along the way that, were a blessing in disguise in hindsight?
Yeah, I've actually thought about doing a LinkedIn post on what I learned from my failures, because I think it'd be interesting. I mean, those are the things. It's one thing to go, yeah, I tried this and it worked. Okay, but I tried this and it didn't work. Why didn't it work? And this goes back to that concept of reflecting. So one that just, two. One that jumps out is we did an early ABM campaign to the Fortune 100, and we developed these high-end giveaways. We used an outside agency. I mean, it was great material. And we launched it and we got nothing from it. I mean, zero. And it was because we had the wrong buyers. We had targeted the wrong people. We were not a product that a Fortune 100 would buy, even though we wanted them to buy it. Again, one of the flaws of ABM, you can't decide who's going to buy your product. They're going to decide if they're going to buy your product or not. So, not doing that initial homework of saying, who is our absolute right buyer, then how do we market to them? So that was a flaw. Another one early on, this is early video days. We created what I thought was such a creative video. It was 19 minutes long and nobody would watch it. And I was like, no, it's really good. And they're like, it's 19 minutes long. So, some of those stumbling moments, but again, I wouldn't have known it if we wouldn't have created a 19-minute video. I wouldn't have known it if we wouldn't have done those things to those Fortune 100s. So, I think the message behind it is constantly experiment. Hopefully you can experiment in kind of bite-sized chunks to where you don't blow your whole budget and then go, oh, that didn't work. But experiment and see what works. And then if it works, do more of it. If it doesn't work, get rid of it.
Yeah, I actually patted us on the back. We tried to launch a referral process and effort too soon at one point, and when it kind of wasn't panning out in the way that we thought, like, well, good, next thing, it didn't work, next thing, and it was a lesson. It's like, we'll try it again in a year, right? You referenced leadership a couple times, and I'm curious, both, and I mean, down to who you might follow on LinkedIn, but what are some companies or some leaders, people that you do follow that you either admire or you think that others can get a benefit from following or learning from? Who are some of the folks that you subscribe to?
You know, I'm actually, I went back to grad school 3 weeks ago, I think I started, and it's in organizational leadership. So I'm getting a dose of people that I read that I go, wow, I don't think I'm going to follow this person, but because some of the stuff is just kind of out there. Lencioni is still at the top of my list. I think he is just such a practical thinker when it comes to leadership and the way you build culture. I'll toss out Patrick, your and my friend Davis Smith. I think he is a phenomenal leader. Jeremy Andrus, who is the CEO of Traeger Pellet Grills, is another one that's just great and amazing to hear and listen to his story.
Nice.
Dan Irwin, my current professor, you should follow him. See if he gives me extra credit for that.
And then this is always a fun question. If you could go to Joe 15, 20 years ago, give yourself some advice, what would you go back and tell yourself if you could go and accelerate some learnings, change a few things? What would you tell yourself?
I don't know if I'd change it, but it would be a learning. And I'll even point everybody to a LinkedIn article that I wrote called my switch from seat 3A to seat 27E. And the last time I looked at it, it had been read 1.5 million times. And it talks about the impact of being a heavy business traveler. So you mentioned in the beginning that I'd been to 26 countries. Most of those were business related as we opened up offices. But I think what the article speaks to is just making sure that your priorities are set in the right way, and that sometimes you have to sacrifice, and sometimes you don't see blind spots and things that you should recognize. So I'd point people to that article. And if I could rewind it, I really don't think I'd change anything, because I really like the outcome for me. I like how things turned out. So even though there were bumps in the road, I look at it and I go, yeah, but I really like how I got here and where I ended up getting to. And so not really any significant turns that I'd say, I wish I wouldn't have taken that one. Even, I can think of a couple companies on my resume that I think, man, glad I'm not there anymore, but glad that I went there because I learned things there.
Do you have a few either technologies or companies that you see as, that are on the up and up that other people should be aware of, keep an eye on, or that you're excited about for one reason or another?
Well, I'll share one little one. I'm on the board of directors for a company called Textel, and a lot of companies look at how are they going to service customers? How do they make this customer experience just as good as it can be? Sharpen's another one of those. But Textel allows you to interact with customers over business lines using texting technology. And it is, they have customers that come and go, this, has just changed the NPS scores that we see with our customers, because they get to communicate with us the way they want to communicate with us. So that would be one. I'm pretty excited about some of the technology in the healthcare space, that things they're doing with analytics to actually improve the care that people can receive based on being able to look at and see doctor ratings, physician ratings, appropriateness of surgeries that happen. I think we're going to see a lot of change in healthcare because of what health tech companies are doing.
Yeah, they've been fighting an uphill battle, but I think it is going to eventually. There's a lot of companies that I've been seeing for many years working on that industry, and I feel like they're just maybe gonna start to break through. But it's probably the most laggard of the industries, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Well, I want to make sure if there's other questions that people want to ask while we still have Joe's full attention. And then at the same time, Joe, I'll ask if there's anything that you would like to add before we sign off. But one more round for the group, Coop, and attendees. Anything you guys want to jump in with?
I haven't had anybody submit anything within the past 5 minutes, so I think the well is dry for now. And thank you so much for all those answers.
Yeah, I would just maybe just wrap up with kind of this career concept around, getting to the CMO chair. It's an interesting proposal because I think what you find is a lot of people, there's a lot of middle management jobs, and people are pretty quick to find a middle management job, and they're managing a little team. And then that leap or that jump up to kind of a C-level job or an executive job is just, there's not that many of them, and it's just, a lot harder. So what I think works is start by being great at something that's pretty narrow. Be known as the rock star for paid search, or the best person at creating creative videos, some segment of whatever your profession is. I use 2 marketing examples. Be a rock star at that and get, 3, 4, 5 years experience being that rock star to where you could go anywhere and take a job doing what you're really, really good at. Then start to branch out. Too often people jump in early on with this broad thing. They say, well, yeah, I did a year's worth of PR, and then I did a year's worth of paid search, and then I did a year's worth of event stuff. And employers look at you and go, yeah, so you're kind of good at a lot of things, and it just doesn't work very well. So go be a rock star, and then start to branch out. Then say, okay, what other skills can I add to my CV? And you do that by volunteering, by doing some of that work on the side, but you just start ticking off those things to where you can say, yep, I've got experience with this and this and this and this. And I think that is what kind of propels you. I'd also caution people about breaking their resume. Too often, they've got a really nice path, they're cruising along, and somebody offers them, $1 more an hour to go do something that's completely different, and they jump off that path. And then 10 years later, they're trying to figure out how come nobody wants to, really see the value that they can deliver. Well, anyway, this was a lot of fun. Those questions were awesome, and I hope there was some value there.
Absolutely. No, Joe, thank you so much for the time, for the discussion. I know this was possibly the most interactive fireside chat we've ever had in terms of participation and questions and things. So it's great to see all the folks engaging here. If people want to get a hold of you, what should they do?
Go to LinkedIn. So I'm not the Joe Staples that's an ad executive, the baseball player, or the war hero. So if you discount those, you'll find me.
Nice. All right. Well, Joe, thank you again. Thanks so much for the time and the conversation. We appreciate it. Take care of yourself. Stay in touch.
Okay. Bye.
Cheers.